Hello everyone, this is Will and today I'm going to do a commentary on a two-man gang setup. Me and Garmon went roaming the other day in two thoraxes, but before I go into the actual roam I would like to talk a bit about the fittings on our ships as well as on the concept of doing two-man gang stuff in general. These are the fittings we were using, and as you can see we have one max gank fitted thorax and one max tank fitted thorax. You'll be seeing the fights from the perspective of the max tank thorax, which I was flying. Now, as most of you have probably already figured out, the concept behind a setup like this is really quite simple. It's really all about making your opponents shoot the tank ship, while in return this will give your gang ship time to go in and apply its own DPS. And there are several ways to make that happen, as we will demonstrate, but there is of course still always the chance of the opponent switching off the tank ship and start killing the gang ship, which will die very fast because it doesn't have much of a tank. But that doesn't actually happen very often because just very few people have enough situational awareness to actually make that judgment call and switch targets, so that's not really a huge problem, I think. Now, as for the actual fittings, you can see our gang ship, it's a shield fit. It has the biggest possible guns and just a ton of damage mods, so we're pretty much just trying to get as much DPS out of this ship as possible. And it also has a tracking enhancer because that helps applying its DPS from a bit more range, and also helps against small targets like frigates. It's shield fit because that gives it a lot more agility and speed compared to an armor fit, which is very good because it needs to be able to move around quickly and get quickly right on top of our targets, so it can kill them before our tank ship dies. Now, the tank ship on the other hand has two plates. We're pretty much trying to get as much tank as we can, and in return it doesn't have power grid enough to fit medium-sized guns, but that doesn't really matter because it's actually quite cool to have small guns in this ship, because that gives us a lot more utility against frigates, for example, because then I can track them much better. And also the reason I'm using lasers is because it gives me a bit more versatility, because I can use Scorch, which is pretty nice because as a consequence of being heavily plated and tri-marked, this ship is very, very, very slow and unagile, so it's nice that I can apply a bit of DPS from range while I'm slowly approaching our target. In addition, I also have a web in my spare mid slot. This could have also been a tracking disruptor, which I'm actually going to switch it to at some point in the roam. Either works fine, but they're good for different things. I'll explain that later. Also, we are both using Valkyries, at least as a default, because we could have been using hammerheads, but if we did that then we would have only kinetic and thermal damage. So it's quite nice to actually have these Valkyries with their explosive damage, because in some situation it's just nice to have a bit more variation in your damage types. For example, if we were shooting a ship with Tech 2 Calendar resists, which are very high for thermal and kinetic, then it's pretty nice to have the Valkyries around. Also, those are much better versus frigates. Now, to elaborate a bit more upon the concept of two-man gangs, I actually think that this is one of the most fun kinds of setups to fly in the game. Well, at least one of my favorite kinds of setups, and there are several reasons for that. First off, it's extremely cost effective because these ships are very cheap, at least compared to what you can actually engage and kill with them. Besides that, they are very engageable because there are not a lot of people who are afraid of a couple of Tech 1 cruisers, and that in turn means that it's very easy to get fights, something that can often be hard in larger, more fancier ships that's not even capable of doing the same thing that these can. Furthermore, it's very easy to fly. It's pretty much like taking one ship's rolls and splitting it into two, so you only perform half of the role of one ship. Like, one of the guys only really has to concentrate on tanking, while the other guy can concentrate on applying as much DPS as you can possibly do. While if you are solo, for example, in a ship, you'll often have to both concentrate on tanking and doing your DPS. So this is a lot simpler and easier to fly. It's also very versatile, I think, at least compared to being out solo. Pretty much you'll have the tank of a battlecruiser here, and at the same time you have the gank of a gank with battleship. We pretty much do 1000 DPS combined with this setup. So and that will be with cruiser and frigate sized guns, so we have very good tracking as well. So that means we have a lot of anti-frigate capability. Furthermore, we also have a lot of anti-E-war capability because well, not a lot, but quite a bit, because usually a lot of E-war is only targeted to one ship, and in this case that's often going to be the tank ship, which doesn't really care because you can be jammed and you can be capped out or tracking disrupted. That doesn't at all stop the other ship, the gang ship, from doing its job, and it doesn't stop the tank ship from doing its job either, because your job is just to tank. And finally, the last advantage of flying a setup like this is that it's simply just a lot of fun to fly. On to the actual roam. We start in Novocacan, a couple of jumps from Jeter, and from there we're going to roam through lowsec to get to Oval, from where we're going to go into Syndicate. Actually, we normally don't roam lowsec a lot, but well, we thought it would be a little fun to just do something different. Okay, so we go into Tamer, and Tamer is a system well known for having a lot of activity because it's an entry system into lowsec and kind of the only way out of this part of lowsec. So there's often something going on in the top belt, so we warp to a nearby celestial to the top belt. It's often a bad idea to warp directly to it because you don't know what may be there. And we can see that there's a Talos in the belt when we scan it. There's some other ships nearby, but they're probably in a pause. So I warp to the belt at 50 kilometers. I warp in first while Garmon wait a bit because we want the Talos to go for me and make sure that he's aggressed on me and keep shooting me when Garmon arrives, because Garmon will die very fast if he's primaried. Anyway, I land on the grid, and the Talos is sitting at 0 to the belt, so I'm 50 off him. He starts moving towards me, so we decide that Garmon should warp in at 20 kilometers to the belt, because then he might end up close to the Talos, but that doesn't happen because the Talos kind of starts moving in another direction, and he's moving way faster than we expected. It turns out he has the Loki links active, and that means he's going to be a lot harder to catch than we thought, because he's actually faster than even our shield Thorax. At this point though, he's getting rather close to me, so I burn for him with overloaded web. If I can manage to web him, then we'll most likely be able to get on top of him, but he just managed to stay out of my web range. However, he tries to change his alignment here. He's probably trying to warp out, I guess, or I'm actually not sure, but in any case, Garmon managed to land a scram on him, and I try to burn closer. You can see I burn a bit at an angle here, because otherwise he will track me too well and do a lot of damage. So I managed to mitigate some damage here. In the meantime, a vagabond that's a friend of the Talos lands in the grid, and he starts to go for me. However, Garmon has now gone right on top of the Talos and is applying all of his DPS, and it's going down fast. So at this point we are considering whether we should try and go for the Vagabond as well. But we can see from his speed that he's also using the local links, and we know it's just going to be very hard to catch him. So instead we try to decide to get me out of this alive, and I align to a Celestial, and then Garmon is going to try to force the Vagabond's point off me by going in between me and the Vagabond, because the Vagabond probably doesn't want to get into Garmon's scram range. So by doing that he can kind of force the Vagabond further away from me. And yeah, you can see I'm pointed still at 38 kilometers, but then I managed to break free and warp off. Garmon also gets out. He just warps off before the Vagabond gets to tackle him pretty much. So we kill a Talos and we both survive, and I think this is pretty much a good example of how effective a setup like this is, because even though both of their ships, or each of their ships, are worth more than both of our ships combined, and in addition to that they also had warfare links while we didn't, we still managed to come out on top. Anyway, we go repair and continue roaming. A couple of jumps later, still in lowsec, Garmon cross jumps a flashy Tempest. he's a bit in front of me, so I'm still warped to the gate that he jumped through. And when I land, I can see that the Tempest is aligning out, so I guess he's probably gonna warp. So, but I just overload my mag warp drive and approach him and try to get tackle. One thing to note here is that it's usually a pretty bad idea to web a target that is aligning out to warp, because when you web someone in the middle of alignment, it's going to bring his max speed down, which means he can align faster, because being aligned is dependent on both direction and your max speed. So when you're trying to catch someone who's going to warp off, tackle them before you web them. However, in this case I could see from the Tempest speed that he was already at max speed, so I'm guessing that he's only aligned, but he's not gonna warp. He's probably just waiting for us to aggress him, so I just web him right away when I can. So anyway, I get him tackled, and Garmon comes in to apply his DPS. So the next thing I need to worry about is being able to tank for as long as possible while Garmon kills this Tempest. So I try to get up my transversal, and in this case I do it manually. So I actually kind of try to orbit this guy manually, and it's usually a good idea to orbit manually, especially if your target is moving as fast as you, or nearly as fast as you, because if you try to orbit and your target is moving as fast as you, and he's moving in one direction, then you'll end up having no transversal a lot of the time. And in this case, as you can see, I'm getting capped out by the Tempest heavy newts, so I can't web him while he's webbing me, so he's actually moving faster, or as fast as me. So just using the automatic orbit option wouldn't work at all in this situation. However, the Tempest makes a big mistake in not moving at all, so that means I could have actually just orbited him. But yeah. The point is, it's often much safer to manually do it, to make sure that your transversal is always high. If you're in a small fast frigate, then it's often okay to just choose orbit 500, or in any situation where you're in a ship that is much faster than your target. And as you can see, like I mentioned earlier, E-War doesn't really mean a lot to this, because even though I'm webbed and completely capped out, it doesn't stop me from performing my role, which is simply to tank while Garmon kills it. So the Tempest should have definitely started neuting Garmon instead. If he capped out, then we probably wouldn't have had a chance of killing him, because this Tempest was actually a dual rep Tempest, which means he can tank quite a lot. And as you can see, he actually managed to hold on in very low structure for quite a while, but he did go down eventually. After this we keep going, and we arrive in Willl, which is on the edge of lowsec. In Willl, we decide to refit my Thorax to have a tracking disruptor instead of a web. This will mean that we have a bit less defense against frigates and other small ships, but give us a bit more utility and survivability against bigger ships. For example, I can tracking disrupt gunships that are shooting me from afar, or with an optimal range disruption script, or if I'm right on top of them, I can tracking disrupt them with the tracking speed script, so I can transversal tank them even better. We set a destination to a small group of systems that looks kind of active inside the syndicate, and head out. On the first jump, which is the entry system of PF-, the entry into syndicate, there's a small camp consisting of a couple of artillery tornadoes and a couple of frigs. We can see that they are artillery tornadoes, we realize that at once because they're sitting 100 kilometers off the gate. But due to the massive spawn radius on regional gates, you can end up spawning in very different places, and we end up both spawning pretty far from the tornadoes, so we're not really in a position to go for them. So instead, we decide that I should start burning back to the gate, so I take their aggro, and then we can jump out. Also, this allows us to feel them out, see how much DPS they do, and also if they want to play with us at all. And they do go for us, but we managed to both get back to the gate, and then we go and repair in Willl, and immediately head back to try again. We noticed that one of the tornadoes is kind of closer to the gate than the other one. So we're hoping that we spawn kind of close to this tornado, or at least close enough for me to use my tracking disruptor on him, because that will allow me to mitigate a lot of the damage that he can do to me, which will allow me to tank for long enough to Garmon to burn after them and get tackled on one of the tornadoes. However, I end up spawning directly above the gate, which is on the opposite side of the tornado, so I'm very far. Garmon did however spawn pretty close to them, so instead we decide that he should just try to burn for them at an angle, so and they hopefully won't track him due to their very, very poor tracking. At the same time, I'm gonna burn in the direct opposite direction to get in range to warp him when he gets there and get tackled on one of the tornadoes, because I'm actually almost 150 kilometers away from them already. It turns out that the tornadoes are actually able to track Garmon quite well, and he actually ends up being in very low structure. You can't see that on the watch list right now because it's not updating for some reason, but it'll update in a second, and then you can see him being in very low structure. However, when he gets kind of close to the first tornado, it warps off. It ends up walking rather close to me. Actually, he lands 50k off me, so I just start burning directly towards him. You notice I switch my optimal range script for a tracking speed script because I'm so close to him that I'm gonna end up being well inside his fall off if I use the optimal range script. So I might as well use the tracking speed script instead, and then try to burn for him at an angle. In the meantime, Garmon warps off in very low structure, and this tornado that I'm burning for manages to warp away as well. So we didn't really manage to get a fight out of this, but because we just decide to start moving on after this, as these guys are being way too defensive to get a fight out of. A couple of jumps further into Syndicate, we find a rupture that's sitting off a gate. Garmon starts to burn for it while I try to get in position to warp. However, in the meantime, a Saber jumps in to the gate that I'm near, and he starts burning for me. Since there's like 3 different cruisers on grid here, and the rupture we're going after doesn't seem to be related to the Saber, we can be quite certain that this Saber isn't alone, because he obviously wouldn't be trying to kill 3 cruisers on his own. But we're quite confident that there's not a large gang around, because we haven't really seen any activity here at all. So I decide to let him tackle me and just start killing him. And here you can see the advantage of having small guns fitted to your tank Thorax, because that Saber probably wasn't expecting me to be able to trank him this well, so he actually is going down fairly quickly. He is realizing this though, and he starts to slow boat away from me, and since I'm scrammed by him, I can't keep up because he's a lot slower. Actually here, the web would have probably been nicer to have than the tracking disruptor. Notice what I'm doing now though. I overload my scram, and then I overload my Mach warp drive as well, and just start spamming it, because I'm hoping that he is not overloading his scram, because then when he gets out of scram range, I will still be scramming him because I'm overloading, while his scram will deactivate because it's out of range because he isn't overloading, and then I will immediately activate my MWD to try and pull some range. And as you can see, that works out pretty well. In the meantime though, a hurricane backup for the Saber has arrived, and I do a small mistake here. I should have put my tracking disruptor on the hurricane immediately and switched to an optimal range script while he was approaching me, because he's actually doing a bit of DPS from range. However, it's okay. It's just a small mistake, because I should switch to the tracking speed disruption script anyway as soon as he gets right on top of me, so I can better transversal tank him. Anyway, the Saber goes down and Garmon warps to me, and we start working on the hurricane. Again, here you can see I try to manage my transversal manually. I should have probably gotten a bit closer, a bit faster, but it probably didn't make that much of a difference here, because a hurricane has pretty nice tracking in any case. And once more I end up being completely capped out, and as you can see, that again, it doesn't stop me at all from doing my job, except apart from not being able to use my tracking disruptor, which is a minor detail here though. So we kill the hurricane as well. I go repair, and after I walk to a random gate in the system, I find that there's a fleet stepper sitting on it. and he jumps through, and I follow. Garmon is kind of far. He's in a 40 AU warp, but I'm gonna see if this stabber is gonna aggress me on the other side. He doesn't seem too keen on engaging at first. He starts burning off. This is usually a sign, though, that people are willing to engage, but they want to get some range first. So I follow him and see if he aggresses me, and he does. But judging from the speed, I realize that this is a shield stabber, and he's probably not going to try to brawl me. So he's going to be very hard to catch, because neither mine nor Garmon's ship is super fast, at least not compared to this stabber. So we're trying to figure out how to tackle this stabber. In the meantime, Garmon has now landed on the other side of the gate, and I tell him not to jump through. Then I'm going to start burning back towards the gate now, because we moved kind of off the gate, and I'm just going to keep burning in that direction, because then I know the stabber is going to try to follow me, and that will bring his path right across the gate, and then I'm going to tell Garmon to jump in just as he is about to be within range of the gate. So and then we'll just hope for Garmon to spawn in a position where he can get to tackle the stabber. So just as the stabber is approaching, I tell Garmon to jump, and he's actually extremely lucky with his spawn position, because he ends up being right in front of the stabber. So he just pretty much has to decloak and lug up the fleet stabber and scram it, and after that point it's pretty much an easy kill. Since this is a shield stabber, it doesn't have a lot of HP, and we just, it's still shooting me, so it's not really doing anything, and Garmon is just killing it. Anyway, I think this is a pretty good example of alternative ways to set up a kill if you cannot, for example, tackle a ship because it's way faster than you. And it just goes to show that there is almost always a way to get something out of a situation if you just, figure it out. After this, we decide that we're gonna leave Syndicate and roam south towards Stealth, and at this point in the roam, we've only been roaming for like an hour or something, and we're getting 4 good fights even in pretty quick succession. But then it's like we just couldn't find any more at all in this room, and I think that's something that you should keep in mind about Eve, is that the nature of the game is just extremely random. You can never be certain when you're gonna get good fights and when you're just gonna be unlucky and get nothing. You can have like entire days where there's just nothing happening and you find no fights or only blobs or something like that. I've actually had a few Eve mails lately from some of our subscribers who have been going out and trying the stuff that we do, and some of them have been saying that it seems impossible for them to get fights, but they've only tried a few times and they've just been killed by blobs or something like that every time. And I can only say that it's really just all about keep trying, because your luck it's bound to change at some point. As I said, it's just the nature of the game that is extremely random. You never know where the fight is and when it's gonna happen, so just keep going and you'll get them eventually. We spend a lot of time not getting fights too, as everybody else, so no difference there. It's just a matter of getting used to it. We did, however, end up having a bit of fun in this room, because after roaming for another hour without getting anything, we ended up in Fountain, and we decided to assault a pos simply to die, because we were so far from Empire, and we didn't really want to have to go all the way back there. So we assaulted this test pos, and it was pretty funny. It actually took like 15 minutes before the people inside the shield actually managed to go outside and kill us, so that was pretty fun. Anyway, that's the end of this video as far as the room goes. I hope you found this video useful, and I strongly recommend that you try a gang setup like this at some point, because as I said, it's just extremely cheap and cost effective. It's easy to fly, and it's also a lot of fun. And it's important to note that you can actually do this with a lot of other ships. It's not only the Thoraxes that can do a thing like this. A lot of other crews can do it, or you could even do it with a battle cruiser, like 1 max tank and 1 max gank battle cruiser. It's always, no matter what ship type you use, it's just a matter of making your opponents attack the max tank ship while the max gank ship then does its job, so to speak. So yes, that's all I have for you today. Be back later.